And welcome to today's edition of Horse's Mouth Live, the Extraordinary Advisor Show. My name is Ellen Rogin, and as always, I have fabulous guests that bring you unbelievable information to help you in every area of your life, especially your business. And today is no exception. We're going to be talking with communications expert, author, Carolyn Ellis, who is a longtime friend of mine. She's been on the Horse's Mouth show with me before many years ago, and she has a brand new book that just came out, Lead Conversations That Count. And I'm really excited to have Carolyn on because we're going to talk about how to make your meetings more engaging, how to have, what the challenges are now that we're virtual, how to have conversations that are super impactful, even when they're difficult. And this, of course, helps you with your clients and your team, but it might also help you with your personal conversations. So let me give you a little bit of the official background on Carolyn. Carolyn Ellis, as I mentioned, is the author of Lead Conversations That Count, How Busy Managers Can Run Great Meetings. And she's an engagement specialist. She's a facilitator and a leadership coach. I've done coaching with Carolyn in the past. She's really talented and fabulous at helping people get really clear on things. She's the principal of BrillianceMastery.com, which is a boutique consulting firm, a facilitation firm, and she helps leaders transform complexity into clarity. And as advisors, I know that that is your goal as well, to transform the complexity of the financial industry into clarity for your clients. And Carolyn, one of the things that I learned about Carolyn, even though I've known her a long time, after I got her official bio, is that she actually went to Harvard and got a graduate degree in public policy from there. And my typical joke is that, how do you know someone went to Harvard? Because they tell you, and Carolyn has never mentioned that.
Yes, I kept it quiet because I am Canadian. And so we often don't lead with that because there's not quite as many of us up here who've had that Ivy League education, although there's more and more. But yeah, that's something that I didn't uncork a lot. And obviously I didn't share that with you. So surprise.
Yeah. And how impressive, right? And so, I know Carolyn is brilliant. And now we know she's got the credentials to back that up. Not that I ever wondered, but I also think it's really beautiful and authentic that she doesn't lead with that. And maybe that's the Canadian in her, but it's cool. So, Carolyn, Lead Conversations That Count, and I'm not your publicist, even though I keep showing the book, but it's really a fabulous book. And I'm curious though, why another book on communications? Why now? Why do you think that, it's so important? And this idea of running great meetings, why did you want to get this information out there?
Thank you. And it's a great question. And first of all, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. I think at the big macro level, one thing drove me to write this book, which was, I feel that in the last several years, and because my background is in public policy, I've worked in the provincial government here in Canada. And so that ability to really understand that there are issues that we as a society have, and that we need to be able to speak with each other to solve these issues, and that there are different people with different interests, and to not kind of immediately polarize or demonize people who don't necessarily agree with you. And I think in our society, whether it's in your country, my country, around the world, we're having some really important conversations right now about some of the crazy complex challenges that we have, whether it's on the environmental side or the social justice side. We're having an awareness, a growing awareness of the need to be willing to hear voices that maybe typically don't get heard at a table. So I really feel like, we need to get back to understanding each other and being able to have a decent conversation. And my stress about that is because I feel like we're blowing it. So how do we get back to working together rather than really tearing each other apart, which is unfortunately what I'm seeing. And then if we take that down a level, this book is, you're right, it can be helpful on a personal front, but I really thought I would take that slice into people who are the managers, because they kind of manage that place of having to run the meetings, having to inspire the team. And a lot of organizations do not have a really strong culture around meetings. So basically you're dealing with a lot of friction and resistance by people like, oh, another waste of time. And when you layer in the pandemic, people are, we're zoomed out, we're tired, we're stressed. So there's, how do you capture people's attention and get their best focused thinking and collaboration in that setting? And then the managers often, they may not have had the experience yet. They may not have had the training. And it's not easy to really design a conversation where you have somebody who might be in the room, somebody who's coming in through your teleconference or video conference system. It's tricky. So the thesis of the book is, let's do a better job at that. And the starting place for being able to do that is yourself. So leading yourself in order to lead others and have a more fruitful and connecting conversation.
So in addition to with your team, I imagine these tools would be helpful in a client meeting as well. Yes. Is that right, Carolyn?
Absolutely. I mean, and again, like the frame of the book is a little bit more organizational. And for your advisors, that would be like, oh, but wait, I'm a one-person shop, or I just have a couple of staff. But I think at the crux of everything, it doesn't matter about the structure, it doesn't matter about the titles. So how do we speak to each other? How do we listen to each other? How do we understand each other and work together? And that certainly is, I think, the space that your listeners and your financial advisors play in all the time, that they have to maybe have a difficult or complex conversation with a client, or they're feeling confronted by, like, why don't more people understand this stuff? I mean, this seems so obvious to me. And you're speaking to maybe a client who's very intimidated about money or investment. And so you're tapping into not just the information, but also like some of the interior stories or wounds or, lack of belief that people have about themselves. So you're crossing into that territory where it's really important that you be able to meet people where they are and draw forth the best in that conversation. So whether it's a big corporation or even just talking to a member of your staff and delivering some feedback that's needed. I mean, we have those kinds of opportunities a lot, don't we?
Yeah. And I think that point about with your team, hopefully advisors are a little bit more mindful on communication with their clients. Although in the work that I do with advisors, I know that they're always looking to sharpen the saw with that. I have heard from advisors it's really hard to keep team. They're always looking for a new staff person. And when I think back about when I had my practice, I never lost an employee. I mean, one person retired. I fired a couple, which maybe should have been fired sooner than that. But I think that sometimes some of this, not always, has to do with advisors not really putting any effort into those communications with their teams. All their focus is on their client, and they're like, you do your job or whatever. But I think having some structure around having really deliberate, good conversations and meeting with your clients is so important. So I'm so glad we're having this conversation. So the fact that we've moved virtually from most of us, and it's going to continue like this, maybe there's some in-person meetings happening, but it's back and forth and there's more virtual. Like, how has that impacted people's abilities to have good meetings? And what are some suggestions that you have for people?
Yeah. I mean, it's had a huge, huge impact. And I think we've come up a fairly steep learning curve over the course of the last, several months, year and a half, depending on when you listen to this conversation. So we've come a long ways, but I think we need to take it up a notch, because there's still a lot of places where we are just transposing how we used to have our meetings into the virtual space. And let's be honest, how we used to have our meetings sometimes wasn't that great. It wasn't inspiring. It didn't make you be like, oh, when is the next one? I can't wait to be there. So we're sort of imported some bad habits. And then when you put it into this lens of like the camera and the technology of it, it's easy to become flustered or pay more focused attention to like how you're talking to people, rather than creating a space to have a back and forth dialogue and a real conversation. So some of the ways I see that show up is putting way too many agenda items into too short a period of time. It's like we're packing the suitcase, and you know how it is when you come back home from holiday, there's only like 20% that you actually wore, and then the rest you just have to like put back in your closet or whatever. So we're doing that with our meetings, and that is exhausting. It really is very taxing on us cognitively to do that. So I think that's a big mistake. I think the other key thing is because we're looking at a lens. There's this kind of feeling like you have to perform, like, oh my gosh, there's a camera, and so we do a lot of talking at people. And I the classic is to have like an hour long, or maybe it's a half hour meeting, and the first 20 minutes, or say 80% of that meeting is somebody just talking at a bunch of people. And then it's like, oh, we're not gonna let's hear from you. And by that point, they're either multitasking, they're on their emails, they've shut their cameras off, they're not paying attention. So you're not making that connection. You're not listening to what I call the participant's voice. And the wisdom is in the room. It's not just in your head. And there's an alchemy that happens when you create that space for a real, true question and answer, and building on each other's ideas. And I think that that's equally valid in the financial advisor space. It might be easy to jump to assumptions about, well, what makes sense for this particular client, instead of really pausing to say, do I understand your objectives correctly? Like, what's really most important for you? Is it this, or do you want more of that? Help me to understand. And then we just, keep quiet and let them talk, because I think that aspect is missing. And speaking of talking to people and making room for that kind of back and forth, we're so functional. We're almost more focused on the process and making things let's just cross it off the list. We're not, using that warm up time that we used to have when we would be walking down the hallway together, or in the, pouring each other a cup of coffee and just saying, so, how was your weekend? How's the golf game going? Or whatever it was, like that little chit chat that might seem sort of superficial or not necessary. I think is really important that we design that into our virtual and our hybrid meetings, because otherwise we lose some of that human, what makes us unique, and how can we appreciate each other other than just through the functions of the jobs that we do. So those are some ways that I feel that we're kind of losing the soul of our connection through being in virtual spaces. You can build it in, but you have to think about it. It doesn't just happen automatically in the, here's what we need to do in this meeting.
So I want to get into your process, but I want to also make sure I'm hearing some of the juicy nuggets that you just shared with us. So one of the things I heard is that we need to have kind of more spacious agendas, that maybe we're packing in too much that we could possibly have done in person, but especially when it's virtual.
Yes.
So are you suggesting maybe shorter meetings, but more frequent, or just really being more deliberate about what's really essential to happen at those meetings and what could happen outside?
Great question. That's a great question, because that is another way that our meetings have changed, because it used to be fairly standard. It's like, oh, I'm going to bring the briefing package to the meeting and I'll walk you through it, and then you can ask me questions. We need to think a little bit more about what's really critical to happen in conversation. So in a virtual setting, I would say, send the brief in advance. Let them read it. Some people, and you really have to pay attention to how people like to learn and listen. So for those people who really need to have something in their hand and they need to read the text, give them that. Give them some time and space to read that, and know that when you come to that meeting, that's when they can review and get their questions answered, or maybe they can email you a couple of questions they're thinking about in advance. So you don't pack all of that product, like what needs to happen to make the meeting happen, all into that space. Some things happen together when you're in the virtual space, so synchronously, but what can happen outside the meeting asynchronously, so you can really leverage the time that you are together in that virtual meeting.
That makes so much sense. And I could also imagine with a client asking them, would you prefer me sending this ahead of time? Do you just want to go through it? I know you're really busy, because really busy, might mean for me, look, I'm not going to look at it ahead of time. So let's just go through it together. Or it could mean, no, I want to have this. So I think that's a really good question.
And another example, Mitch, which might be really great for your advisors, is, does everything have to be an email? There's a lot of simple tools where you could shoot a little 30-second video and say, hey, Ellen, it's me here. I just wanted to check in with you. I know I sent you the package. Just again, you're conveying the same information, but you're putting more of your personality and your humanity into that through the video. So you can mix it up, what's comfortable for you to do as an advisor, but also just realizing meeting people where they are is a really important part of how you can serve them better.
Yeah. And I just had an advisor who was coaching asked me yesterday about, I use bonbon videos, which are there's lots of different tools out there. And he said, oh, I don't know if my compliance department will let me do that. And here's the thing, you're not going to necessarily or would want to go investment specific on that, but just a hello greeting. And before you out there decide, no, we can't do videos, most of the firms have gotten way more flexible on this. So just find out. It's really a beautiful way to, as Carolyn said, mix things up.
Right.
It's awesome. So I want to make sure you go through, you have, as it says, conversations that count, and you have this count roadmap that you have. Can you explain what that is?
Sure. Yeah. So COUNT is an acronym. I'm a big fan of acronyms, and I can just walk you really quickly through the 5 parts of the model, the roadmap.
Great. Beautiful.
And, the idea of this roadmap is that when you're having that next conversation, that you walk yourself through each of these stages. And there's actually a template in the book that you could just take 10 minutes as part of your preparing yourself for that meeting that will really help you have a different impact in how you lead the session. So C is for calibrate, and calibrate is really about looking at yourself first. So where's my head at? Oh, I'm feeling stressed about this. Oh my gosh, I'm just remembering this thing I haven't done yet. It's distracting me. So just doing a quick scan to say, what's going on for me that I might need to park for now? I don't want to bring this, scattered focus, or I don't want to bring this kind of intention into the meeting, so that you can be really clear and present and listening to what's going to be said in this current meeting. So that's an important step that I think most people don't do. Makes a huge difference. The O is for orient. And so this is where you sort of step out of your own perspective and you really step into the shoes of your clients to say, okay, so from their perspective, what's important for them as an outcome from this conversation? Where could I imagine that they might be having some questions, or what would be a win for them? So you can ask them that, of course, in the meeting, but just to start to orient yourself with some level of empathy and connectedness to them coming in, because it's, people are giving you the gift of their time and attention, they're paying your fees. So we really want to honor that. I think just honoring of people's time and energy much more, because we are all feeling so, spread out in terms of our attention. Okay, so then we get to understand. And that is really about understanding how to listen a little bit better, a little bit longer, how to ask more questions rather than just jumping in with the answers, and really leveraging that space of dialogue that we talked about earlier so that you can really have the best impact and best outcome for your client. The N is for navigate. And navigate is when things can go sideways, when maybe there's 2 clients, and one spouse thinks one thing and the other thinks something else, and they're not in agreement. And how do you navigate and mediate possibly some differences of opinion or different information or direction that they're giving you? So a lot of times we're not, most people aren't just like, oh yeah, bring on conflict. I love that. So we tend to go to weird places when we're experiencing that, that place of conflict in a conversation. So there's some strategies in there around navigate for, how to, first of all, most importantly, is to be able to step back, not take it personally. And often, if you're in that place of conflict, as a tip for folks, is one of the best things you can do is just pause and name it. Say, I'm noticing that we're getting a little bit off track here. It seems like there's some conflict happening. Is it this? So naming it in order to tame it. That's a really important thing that you can just start doing right away. And then finally, the T in COUNT is for transfer, which is, okay, so what's the next step? What's the clear action plan? Because you've had this meeting, you want to take advantage of that momentum, the clarity of decision-making. So who's doing what by when? I mean, that's an obvious thing. Maybe there are some ways that you're working in your discussion to help support that understanding of who's going to do what and when. If you leave the transfer part of the meeting to like the last 30 seconds because you've run out of time because you packed your agenda too much, then you're a bit like people will forget what you talked about. They'll forget what they were supposed to do, and they just zone out like very quickly after they click the end button on their meeting. So really creating a through line, because obviously you're in a relationship. And if you take care of that part, you're really solidifying your role as a trusted advisor in the long haul for them. So it's not just about, oh, let's just get this one meeting done and then, there's a plan and we'll check you out in another 12 months, is to create that ongoing trust in you that you've got their back. And transfer is an important part of that. No balls are dropped.
Yeah. So I want to go back to several of these. So let's start with transfer.
Yes.
I was having a conversation with an advisor this morning who was saying that she, sometimes when she's following up with people, like she doesn't want to pressure them. And I said, whoa. Like part of it is the transfer part. There was no clarity about the next step. Right. And she totally is confident that she's really serving people. She doesn't necessarily give them the ability to commit. Like, okay, are we ready? I would love to work with you. Are you ready to go? And if it's an ongoing meeting, it could also be, okay, so you're creating some accountability. People want to keep their commitments. You're really serving them by doing this. So I think having clarity on that, whether it's your team meetings, okay, this by when, and then you're not pissed because something doesn't go right if you haven't really gotten agreement on that. And then with clients, you're really serving them. I'm going to do this. You're going to do that. Beautiful. Right. The other thing that I really love in your process, and it was in tell me O again. Orient. I teach a lot when I'm working with advisors about picturing and mentally rehearsing your meetings, how you would like it to go ideally. I had not done this, and I am going to do this when I'm teaching them now with, of course, crediting you, Carolyn, have them thinking about the empathy about what would be the best for your client. Not that wasn't in there, but it wasn't explicitly in there.
Yeah.
And so to be really sitting in their shoes, what's up for them? How could you most deeply serve them? And like you said, imagine it doesn't have to be right on. An advisor might go, I don't know. I bet you do know. Even if it's a prospect, many clients have the same worries or fears or problems. And even if it's something is in general of like, they may be nervous coming in here. I want them to feel more calm. Right. So I love that.
And just to add to that point there, Ellen, so imagine if you're having a client, maybe it's a new client that's just like, okay, I'm going to start with you. And you start the conversation, you're like, thanks so much. And, I know often when my clients have their first meeting, they might be feeling a bit nervous, a little uncertain if this is the right step for them. And if that's what you're experiencing, I just want you to know that's totally normal. And here's what we do to move through that. And they're having the like, how did they know? Like they're right in my head. Like, wow, oh my gosh, I really trust this person because they're reflecting my experience back to me. So that's what that orient step helps you to do, is to, get that kind of language and connection. And it opens up that space of trust in you. That's really powerful right from the get-go.
Yeah. And I can imagine some of the advisors sitting here going, like, that would feel scary for me to say that. And what I'd encourage you to do is practice this with a client that you have a great relationship with.
Yeah.
Or like you said, name it to tame it. Wow, it seems like there's something going on here. I mean, clients come in as couples often because they need a third person to have these funny conversations. So for you to do that, they're going to feel like, oh, she really gets us.
Mm-hmm.
And so really important. I love that. And the last thing that I wanted to say about your count process, your count framework, is this idea of really deeply listening and asking even more questions.
Mm-hmm.
I know out there, this, and do you really do it all the time? Right. Our mutual friend, Lisa Dad, who's been on before, who's a sales trainer, said one of the things that is the hardest for advisors is that they're advisors. Like, I know you want to give advice and that will happen at the right time, but you have to have clients ready to hear your good advice.
Yes.
So beautiful. And those questions, I contend in that kind of meeting, you could just ask questions and do very, very little talking, just a couple things at the end. And people are going to love and trust you and want to work with you. It's not really as much about what you say. Would you agree with that?
I mean, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, how many times when, if you are one of those people who's asking questions and being more interested in that other person than in demonstrating how interesting you are, those who walk away from that conversation, I just had a great conversation. This person is fantastic. I can't wait to have my next lunch. And you're like, all I did was I just was curious. I asked questions. I listened and I learned, and I lobbed in a few little points there, but they did the work. But you created the space for them to really feel heard. And I think I think a lot of the problems that we're having, going back to our earlier point about why are we so fractious right now? So people are speaking and not feeling heard. And how do we do that in a way that's not seen as, making people wrong and demonizing and making these people like, no rules apply to you except for this one. So we really need to check ourselves, I think, on how are we listening to people.
And I would add to that, and also how are you dialing down the judgment on that? So like when you were saying demonizing, any client I ever lost in my practice, I think was because at some level I was judging them. And I never said, why are you doing that? Blah, blah, blah. But people get it. There's an energetic exchange that happens that people can read that even if they don't know. And so that all goes to this like whole area of conflict. And, Carolyn, do you have any other kind of quick tips if there is conflict? I tend to be a conflict avoider. I will say that. I'm working on having easier, difficult conversations. But, any ideas if like you're in a team meeting and there's part of your team that isn't getting along, or you're like, have some energy on somebody, suggestions for how to navigate that?
Really, this is where I call it dancing in the moment. You might have all these ideas how what the latest management book told you should do, or the latest workshop or podcast. But you really have to be prepared to dance in the moment. I think the first thing to do is just to pause and take a deep breath. And whether you're just doing that for yourself or you just say, okay, everybody, you know what? We're really getting to a point here, but I'm just going to invite us all just to stop for just a sec. Let's just take a deep breath. And let's just refocus here. What might be happening? So just to really hit that pause button, you may then, from the response you get from people, know that you're going to have to just like park this issue for now. You might have to do a little one-on-ones outside. Maybe there's something that you're going to have to mediate with your team. And it's just not feeling comfortable or even safe for people to have that out in front of everybody, because there's like the stakes are pretty high when everybody's in the room and all the eyeballs are watching this unfold on their screens. So I think, taking that pause and then again, going back to the naming it, like you may not have the answers, but you can say, what I'm noticing is this, and then asking a powerful question like, what's most important for us here? What might be underneath this? If we were to step way back and look at this, what is it we all really like? What's most important to all of us collectively right now? And try to tap people back into that, like that bigger picture of whether it's like doing great work for great clients or having clear communication, or like, what are some of the values that you might have already articulated as a team, and then leaning on those, because that's what will guide you through the rough times. And I think the other thing that you, as the advisor who's really running the show, is to again affirm, to say, listen, we may not always agree on issues. In fact, if we always did, I would be worried that we were turning into a bunch of yes people here. But what we do need to do is agree on how we sort through conflict in a constructive way. So here's what I propose about that.
So important. One of the things I learned in my mindfulness and emotional intelligence training that I went through is about this study that was done at Google. It was called Project Aristotle. And it took them 2 years to do this research. And what they were looking for is what makes the most effective teams. So they went globally all across Google. And it took them 2 years because all their hypotheses about this weren't right at first. It was like, maybe you have a creative person with a techie person. Maybe you have older people with younger people, like all their what made a perfect team or a really effective team. And what they found out, the number one trait was psychological safety. And you mentioned that people need to feel safe. So that can look like when there's a mistake, not calling someone out and making them wrong and embarrassing them in front of the team. It can be making it okay for people to grow out of that. Right. And I actually think, looking back about my team, I don't know that I run the best meetings. I don't know that I was always, I told you I avoid conflict. There's things I didn't do, but I do think I always made things safe for people. If a mistake happened, which they will, I was like, I almost immediately went into, okay, what can we learn from this? Exactly. Got really calm to find good solutions. Right. So I don't want that part to slide under about creating safety for people.
And I think the other thing, I think that's really great, Ellen, to ask that question. So what can we learn from this? Because that's a great place to be at. It's a great model to set for people on your team. And my sense also is that these days, with people feeling a level of sort of the chronic stress that we've had, people are coming into work with a lot of stuff that they're handling. So their emotional resilience is down. They may be easily triggered to not feeling psychologically safe in your team meeting. And it may have actually very little to do with what just happened. It could be some of their baggage that they're bringing in or their stress. So it could just be, hey, listen, let me just check in. Are you all right? Is it like, what can, so like those moments. So I think that there's some bleeding over of the stress and the multitasking and the, kids are in school or not in school, all of that stuff. It makes it hard. So when we hit a bump in the road in our team conversations, sometimes there will be maybe an overreaction than if we had more of that resilience because we were getting our sleep and all of that stuff. Our amygdalas are pretty fired up right now. And so this is why I take the breath, the mindfulness work that you do is so important, is to honestly, it's a lot. I have a pretty robust toolkit of mindfulness and self-management tools. And I've been some days I'm digging in. There's what else can I pull out right now? Because it's just so much.
This is so great. So, Carolyn, if people want to get Lead Conversations That Count, where can they get it?
Okay. I will be happy to tell you. It's available on all of the Amazons. So you can go there. You can also visit me at leadconversationsthatcount.com. That's a site that's dedicated to the book. And I have some occasional webinars and things like that are on there as well. So you're welcome to, and just of course, reach out anytime. I'm at Carolyn@brilliancemastery.com. I'm happy to answer any questions that you or your wild army of wonderful advisors would have.
Yeah, and please do reach out to Carolyn. It's, first of all, great book and super important in your practice. And second of all, she's masterful at facilitation and team training and all sorts of good things. So please check out her information. Carolyn, thank you so much for being here. I've loved this conversation. It counted for sure.
Oh, awesome.
And for all of you out there listening and watching, thank you so much for being here. I'm so grateful for that. Again, my name is Ellen Rogin. You can find out more about me at ellenrogin.com. And if you go to ellenrogin.com / I know I always feel like I have to do that, making a / ellenrogin.com / horse's mouth. You can download my special report, What Extraordinary Advisors Know That Others Don't. Great information in there. And you can find out more about my courses and the work that I do with advisors on my website. And so the question to ponder for today is, how big of a positive impact are you willing to make? And how much do your conversations count? Remember to be great and create great every